Just like white liberals today don't care about black people, what you will learn today is that these melanated Marxist-minded Negroes who are always crying racism and bigotry, they don't care about black people either. That's what you're going to learn today. And by the end of today's episode, I hope you walk away with this profound respect for this woman and her unwavering commitment to exposing the truth, no matter the cost. So, this my girl right here. This is Sister Julia Brown. Ain't she pretty? Just classy, just pulled together with her German Shepherd here. There's actually a story behind why she's sitting here posed with this doggy. I forgot his name. But I'm gonna tell you a little bit about why she got this dog. And then later in the show, we're going to play a clip of Julia Brown actually calling out Martin Luther King Jr. as a traitor and an extortioner, and criticism that was tied to his demands for like $10 billion in socialistic style support for poor people. Right, that was the argument. It was some socialistic style reparations. But first, we need to uncover who Julia Brown was and why her story is so important. So right here, this is a picture of Miss Julia Brown, and I got this from the Ebony magazine. This is a March 1961 article, and we're actually going to had to convert. This magazine is so old, I had to literally convert each page into a JPEG and then convert the JPEG and compile it and compress it into a PDF. So yes, I know the words a little teeny tiny, but you're gonna be all right. Just follow me. I promise through my dramotional storytelling, I will make this article come alive for you guys. So how the article is, I was a spy for the FBI. And the question is, how did Julia Brown find her way into like the Communist Party, right? Like, how does that happen? And so a little bit about Julia. Julia was born in Atlanta. So she's from Atlanta, Georgia, born in Atlanta, Georgia. And then she moved up north to Cleveland, Ohio as a teenager. By the time she was recruited by the Communist Party, Julia was already in Ohio in 1940, like the late 1940s. She was a wife. She was a housewife specifically, but she had this deep passion for addressing racial injustices, right? So here's an aspect of this that I found very interesting. Julia is a housewife, and her husband owned his own business. And he was in the contract hauling business. You guys, and this is the 40s. This man owned 3 trucks. 3 in the 1940s. Now, I thought that black folks just couldn't do nothing in the 1950s because, white supremacy and the redlining and stuff. But hear me clearly. I'm not saying that redlining did not happen. That's not the argument. Not the argument at all. But what I am saying is that Mrs. Julia Brown and her husband in the 1940s managed to find a way or make a way. They moved to Cleveland in 1943. Y'all, my mama was born in 1943. She'd be 82 this year. But this amazing couple, Miss Julia Brown and her husband, they owned their own home on the west side of Cleveland. And according to this article, Julia was wooed by the Communist Party because she believed that she had this deep passion for a lot of the injustice that was happening in the South, and she felt that she had found allies in the Communist Party. And so she later said, quote, "Here is a group of white people on my side." And let's see if it on the next page. So this is a picture of Julia. Now, I had something real funny to tell y'all. When I was flipping through the pages of this Ebony magazine before, this article don't show up to page like 94. But I'm flipping through Ebony, and y'all, there was so many ads for cigarettes and liquor. And I was like, did all we do back then was just drink and smoke? That I mean, I ain't seen so many ads for alcohol in a daggone magazine. I mean, y'all, there was all kinds of good stuff. These ads, the hair problem stuff for bunions. You could even get your high school diploma. I mean, 61. This Ebony magazine, it is a treasure. I encourage you to go look at it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. I'm sorry. Anyway, this is a picture of Julia up there, and this was one of the homes that she owned in Cleveland. Mind you, just for the pro blackity blacks who like, well, you know, she probably was white, married to a white man. No, he was black. He was black. His name was James Brown, Julia Brown. Whatever you try to assert that would make them special to have accomplished this in the 50s, just throw it out. Just throw it out. Like they were just regular black folk, right? But anyway, after the party started wooing her, she said that it seemed very welcoming and progressive and inclusive. And Julia described it as if they, the white people, didn't even know the difference between black and white. She's just like, you know, I feel right at home, and you know, things just, and she talks about that right in this little paragraph right here. There's this individual by the name of Frida, I think that's her name, that kind of recruited her. And she was saying, you know, these white people were just so welcoming, and it was black people there and white people there. And I just felt like, you know, they didn't even see my color. But what she argues and says, it didn't take long for that illusion to shatter. In her own words, she realized, she says she had grabbed a bear by the tail. And she talks about how the Communist Party's revolutionary, like their rhetoric and demands for loyalty is what alarmed her. It was kind of cult-like. She said, you know, you had to be at the meetings, and they demanded complete loyalty. You had to think the way they think. And she said one really early red flag came when they asked her for $100 to support leaders evading arrest under the Smith Act. And it was at this point, Julia quickly realized that she's like, okay, this is no ordinary political group. Like, they're asking me for $100. Y'all, this is in the 40s. Can you imagine? $100 was a lot of money. And so other red flags that she realized early on, she struggled with the Communist Party, their thought control. She said they worked very hard to make sure that you didn't have an independent thought. You couldn't think for yourself. And listen, you don't get in the 1940s to have achieved what her and her husband did just following the group. I really believe that this was a situation where Julia, as a housewife, her husband, he on his grind. He got this contract hauling business. He owns these 3 trucks. He's like, listen, woman, I'm working. Be busy at home. What you doing out in the street at these meetings and stuff? She, you know, just the woman. I'm not trying to lay blame at James Brown saying she was uncovered, but I can see how a housewife, maybe they had a television, maybe they didn't, but she's listening to the radio of all that was going on back home in Atlanta, and she just wanted to do something about it. But she says that during the 1948 presidential election, she said the Communist Party, they instructed her to campaign for Henry Wallace. But the thing they didn't realize, Julia was a patriot. She's like, I love America. I love this country. She says her patriotism got the best of her. And she says that she eventually replaced Henry Wallace's picture in her home with President Truman's picture. And this act of defiance is basically what led the Communist Party to tell her, you know, you could never be a communist because you won't let us guide you. right? We know that you think Truman is the better candidate based on the policies, but we support Wallace, and you supposed to support Wallace because we said that's who you supposed to support. Does that sound familiar? Y'all not gonna like this, but this sounds just like how Democrats act today. You don't vote for me, you ain't black, you ain't with Kamala, you can't come to the cookout, swiping people's black cards away, saying, oh, they not like us. Sound like a bunch of melanated communists to me. I don't know, just an observation. I mean, if you are not lock in step with the Democratic worldview and all of their policies, you know they will disavow you. You're not allowed to have an independent thought. And so Julia here, living in her capitalistic part of the American dream, her and her husband, she got smart. She got smart and quickly learned that these communists were completely anti-American. And Julia didn't want to have anything to do with them. So in 1949, Julia's like, I'm done. She walks away from the party, and then she does something very brave. Like most patriots who like, no, this is wrong. She reported her involvement to the FBI. Being probably a naive housewife, she like, well, maybe they don't know. So let me just go and tell them, like, you know, this communist group, I thought they were down for the people and caring about injustice, but really, these people are anti-American. After she reports this to the FBI, a year later, the FBI reaches out to her and they ask her to return to go back into the party, but this time as an undercover agent. And y'all, this was a decision that Julia made, but it would define the next 9 years of her life. And so now I want to talk about Julia's life as an undercover agent. Here she says, quote, being an FBI informant, and I'm probably around this page. Y'all see the ad for the bunions and the Gypsy Bay oil and Hoyt Sullivan's products? Like, y'all, Ebony, I love black folks. We was just marketing all kinds of stuff. But anyway, she says, quote, being an FBI informant wasn't glamorous. Julia described it as grueling, thankless work. She attended communist meetings up to 5 times a week, went to house parties and dances, and wrote detailed reports on everything she saw and heard. Says she handed over documents to the FBI every month, communicated with them through phone, mail, and secret meetings. And Julia's code name was CC End. That was her code name. And she recalled the constant pressure, saying, you know, I had to watch. She's like, I had to watch and to be able to describe what people looked like, identify these people at these meetings. I had to listen, she says, very carefully to what was said and who said it. She goes, I had to look for identifying marks on people that I didn't know. I was just nervous all the time. One of her biggest successes came when a communist leader asked her to hide sensitive records in her basement, and she alerted the FBI, who ended up retrieving the documents. She returns them the same night, and later she reflects, and it says, you know, this was a really big job, and she was so proud to have done that. But the work wasn't without its dangers. And so it was very costly for Julia to work as an FBI informant. She says Julia paid a high personal price for her work. And there was a social stigma, right? In her Cleveland community, she was shunned as a known communist. Like, we're looking at this now, but back then, people who were alive then, who were very much aware, were like, oh, no. Communism wasn't, unfortunately, It is absolutely socially acceptable today. Why? Because the Democratic Party is just party of the liars, the psychopaths, anti-Christian bigots. All they do is push communism, big government, Marxist ideology. Like it's you can be a communist without calling yourself a communist today, and no one's gonna shun you. But back then, old friends stopped speaking to her. Neighbors avoided her. She was even pushed out. She held a precinct role in the local Democratic Party, and they pushed her out. Don't tell me the Democrat Party ain't them jokers now. They would have been like, yes, come on in. They would have made her a chair, and she probably didn't even have to sing a Negro spiritual to do it. But Julia reflects on how isolated she felt. And she says how she had one or maybe two dear friends, but everybody else just walked away. They walked away from her. She says, I couldn't sit down and explain to anyone. I had to keep to myself and pray and work out things the best I could. That was sad. It says, even her husband, James, suffered. One day, a man called the insurance, canceled the insurance on his cars and trucks. Remember, he owns a contract hauling business. And the man simply, they find out, okay, she's a communist. And the guy who was covering the trucks at the time simply said personal reasons. Didn't even give a reason why he canceled the policy. He was like, it's just personal reasons. Thankfully, though, the FBI quickly and quietly stepped in to secure new coverage for them. And this lets you know just how much communism was disavowed here in this country, right? Like Negroes back then were very much aware and didn't want any parts of communism. But today, heck, the entire Congressional Black Caucus and Black Democrat politicians today, they're all melanated Marxists with a communistic worldview. All you gotta do is listen to the rhetoric and the way they talk, right? Remember, they all live like capitalists, stealing your money via USAID, stealing all your tax money, but they govern and push policies like socialists. Notice the difference? The FBI, they wanted her to infiltrate the NAACP. And the article, and I don't know if I linked the article. I may have. If not, I will link it because I want you guys to have this article. It's just a piece of history. And it's the whole magazine was just incredible. But I will link the article after the show. But the article, it explains how Julia was torn. She's torn between her loyalty to the FBI and then her belief in the NAACP's mission. Mind you, this is the late 40s, about to go into the early 50s. And in Julia's mind, the NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She doesn't know that the NAACP was started by communists. She doesn't know that the NAACP was receiving money from communists. Stanley Levison being involved and who was this, the secretary and the treasurer of the organization. She has this belief in the mission. And so Julia chose to be fair to the NAACP and false to the communists. Ultimately, though, NAACP leaders in Cleveland, they recognized her as a communist plant. They kind of put two and two together and figured her out. And quietly, they just prevented her from gaining any influence. So by the time we get to the late 1950s, everybody is suspicious of Julia within the Communist Party. Like these suspicions were growing. And she recalls one day being followed home by this strange man, and she screamed one night when a man approached her car. And her husband, like most good husbands would do, rushes outside and he finds three men lurking around their property. And so the climax of this came, all of the just the how intrusive this was on her life, when at a party meeting, when she was publicly accused of being an FBI informant. There was a fellow member who claimed to have seen her writing down names at a state meeting. And so obviously Julia's like, I got to deny this. So she denies the charge, and she starts thinking quickly on her feet. And in this very calm demeanor, she's like, I don't have to write down the names of people I already know. And I can't write down the names of people I don't know. I'm like, I like Julia. Julia, listen, I am Julia Brown. This is my girl. Anyway, this defense worked for her. Her defense worked. And the matter at this point was dropped. But Julia, she's recognizing, I got to get out. I'm in too deep, right? I'm caught in a trap. Right? I don't know. I'm sorry, y'all. Elvis reference. Julia's like, it's time for me to dip. I got to go. So shortly afterwards, her and her husband, they moved to the West Coast, and this ends her nearly 9 years as an FBI informant. And Julia left. She left the Communist Party. She was just messed up, right? She's like, she's deeply impacted by her involvement, and she describes her experience as degrading and mentally exhausting, saying, quote, when I left, I couldn't think good. These are her words. I was crabby and cross. The almost 9 years took almost everything away. Now, when she said I was crabby and cross, I said, well, shoot, she sound like black liberals, right? Joy Reid, Simone Sanders, all of these black female liberals that they push out into prominent spaces and give them a whole lot of visibility. These women don't have joy. They are absolutely miserable. They crabby and cross all the time. Jasmine Crockett can't manage her misery out here with all her orangutan energy. I'm telling you something about this worldview, because it's godless and you're actually pushing anti-God, anti-Christian ideology. How do you have the joy of the Lord as your strength when you're pushing these types of policies in this worldview? You can't have no joy. And so I'm not surprised when she says, I couldn't think good and I was crabby and cross, and how she said the almost 9 years took everything away. Now, despite this, though, she says she never regretted her decision to serve her country. Y'all, Julia looked at these 9 years of her life as service to her country. She understands the threat of communism is so severe and so serious. These anti-God, anti-Christian woke-stitians were trying to infiltrate every aspect of this nation's government and society. She viewed that sacrifice as service to her country. I said, now, I would have never thought to describe it in such terms, but she did. And she said, some will look down on me, but as for myself, I will hold my head high and be very proud and grateful that I had the privilege to serve my country. What an American patriot. Y'all, Julia is that chick. I'm telling you, Julia made it clear that if called upon again, she would proudly serve. Like she said, I'd put myself through that hell all over again if it meant starving out and stamping out this threat that wants to take a foothold in this great terra firma that I love, these United States. That is just beautiful to me. And I realize that most Black people, because they've been indoctrinated with this anti-God, anti-Christian worldview known as Marxism and communism, they don't have love of country like Julia Brown was. Like that sentiment that she just expressed, they ain't in them. They ain't got it in them. Now if we can get the indoctrination out and then maybe let them spend some time over in some other country, they may get it then. I think Brittany Griner probably, she know it a little bit. Not enough, but she know it enough to be like, yeah, I just want to be here. I just want to live in America. I don't want to live in another country. Communism is not good. I think that the reason why we don't see this healthy respect and patriotism from many in the community that shares my ethnic image is because they fundamentally, one, they've never viewed themselves as equals in this nation, uh, having access to all the rights and privileges of what it means to be a citizen here. And then two, they've been indoctrinated for so long that they are victims and that they are oppressed and that this country hates them, that they were unable to do what my girl Julia and her husband managed to do in the 40s, which was carve out a little piece of this American dream for yourself by working hard and not being overly obsessed and focused on how others view you and how others see you. How are you in the 1940s a black man owning a contract hauling business with 3 trucks and your wife is a housewife? And not only do you own a home on the west side of Cleveland, but they also ended up buying a property in Shaker Heights. I don't know if there's any Cleveland folks on this live stream. I lived in Cleveland for about a year of my life. It was the worst year of my life. However, I'm very familiar with Shaker Heights. Shaker Heights was always viewed as a very prominent, well-to-do community with the best of schools and beautiful homes and tree-lined streets, and just Shaker Heights was the business. I can imagine how nice it was back then. So, for this Ebony article to highlight this woman's story, it lends some credibility to like, oh, she wasn't crazy. She actually self-admits to be an FBI informant. And her why was because she understood the threat of communism and want to do something about it. Now, you do have people that try to disparage her character and say, you know, it was shameful what she did, infiltrating. It's because they ignorant. They don't understand the threat of Marxism and communism because they're melanated Marxists. That's what this video is seeking to accomplish. It's to uncover the fact that this anti-God, anti-Christian worldview, for all of my Black Christians, you should hate communism just as much as Julia Brown did. But it's because you don't know what it is and what it seeks to accomplish and what its goals are, is why you don't see anything wrong with it. Now, this Ebony article, it doesn't get into how MLK sought to infiltrate the Black church with this anti-God, anti-Christian message. But it's not hard to see how this was the case. Literally at the beginning of the article, I'm trying to remember what page it was on. I think it's at the beginning. She talks about, you see that sub headline, housewife shares communist plot to infiltrate civil rights organizations and Negro churches. She doesn't get into it in the article, but I'm about to get into it tonight. So, Sister Julia, oh Lord, I keep doing that. Y'all, I'm sorry. Y'all, my hand-eye coordination be off, okay? Just flow with me. She doesn't get into it in the article. However, when I examine the worldview that undergirds communism and Marxism, and we now know that it is anti-God and anti-Christian, it's not hard to see how that infiltration happened. The ethnic expression of the Black church historically stood on the word of God. It taught faith in Christ alone, personal responsibility, and unity in Christ. One of King's contemporaries during this time, Reverend J.H. Jackson, y'all, he served as the longtime president of the National Baptist Convention, and he was one of Martin Luther King's most vocal critics. You guys would have to understand, I wasn't born, so when you talk to people who were alive during this time, like J.H. Jackson was the equivalent of the Pope in the Black community. The NBC was this lone force to be reckoned with, and it boasted numbers that would rival a darn near political party. It was that large and that influential. And when J.H. Jackson was at the helm, he vehemently was in opposition to what King was doing, because his opposition to King was rooted in significant ideological and strategic differences, right? So Jackson, he's this theological conservative who believed in the authority of Scripture. He believed in the traditional role of the church as a spiritual and moral guide. You can listen to some of J.H. Jackson's sermons. I said, that man is preaching the sovereignty of God. It's a beautiful, his exposition on the scriptures and how he was just shepherding his church and how big his church had grown. Like he's essentially pastoring a mega church before a mega church was a thing. And it wasn't just that. J.H. Jackson was preaching the unadulterated truth of God's word and the gospel and the spiritual message that mirrored the scriptures. He was also a capitalist, and not like these pulpit pimps that live like capitalists and preach socialism. I'm talking, he's buying property, right, to advance the cause of his marginalized kinsmen according to the flesh. He's learning how to function in his freedom. And he's like, I'm not doing this marching with you, Martin. No, we're not doing this. We are Negroes, and yes, there are injustices, but there is a right way to do this, and the way you're doing it is unbiblical. He viewed King's movement as overly political, and he felt, listen, the church's primary mission, we save souls. Just like I had to tell that chick that was working for me, man, we don't sell ideas. We sell products and beautify spaces. He's telling King, our primary mission, we are about the gospel. We preach the gospel for the saving of souls, not to serve as a vehicle for social or political activism. That is not who we are, Martin. But like all communists and Marxists, they seek to exploit. And Jackson had the spiritual eyes to see how King was trying to hijack the black church to push his political agenda. What J.H. Jackson, and I don't want, and when I say what he built, hear me clearly, the church belongs to Christ. But J.H. Jackson, as the president and head of the National Baptist Convention, Black people weren't walking around crying victimhood. We weren't out here talking and obsessing about white folks. We were worshiping our God and taking care of one another in the community of faith. And it wasn't at the expense of hating white people, because that ain't what the Bible teaches. And so J.H. Jackson could see the pimpantry a mile away, and he was like, yeah, He was like, no, this not what we doing. And so Jackson strongly opposed King's use of civil disobedience, right? J.H. Jackson believes, he's like, this undermines law and order, sir. Like people claim that, and then the movement affirms, it self-attests that, King was nonviolent, right? They love to claim that King was nonviolent. But the issue, there are some problems with that. There are some issues with that because he verbally and outwardly would affirm that he was nonviolent, except under closer examination, you're like, how is this a movement of nonviolence? Why is it always met and ends up in violence with the nonviolent crowd claiming that they didn't do nothing wrong and they're always the victims? Like when you go and you sit at a counter where the people are telling you, hey, you need to leave because we don't want to serve you here. And then you sit there and demand to be served, at some point your foolishness is going to be met with aggression. We already told you, we don't serve your kind here. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not advocating that is right. That is absolutely wrong. But the flip of that is, Why you want to eat somewhere where people are telling you that you can't be here? Like, I don't really want you preparing my food. I'm going down to Joe's Rib Shack. His food tastes better anyway. Why am I sitting here? Like, only a stalker would go somewhere after they've already been told, bro, I'm done with you. Like, we not in a relationship no more. I don't like you. I don't want to be around you. And you like, and you, like, you gonna love, you just gonna make him love you. That's what you gonna do. You sound like a stalker. Where's the lie? I know y'all don't like this. This too much. For many of us, we have been taught that it was virtuous to sit in at the counter and demand to be served. I don't think we've thought through this. I will admit that I never thought through it. Never sat and was like, I don't think that was the right way to go about it because they prepare food. Like, I saw the help. I saw the pie. Right? You know, people do stuff like that. And what was it? Not Miss Millie. What was her name? Oh, the little prissy, little racist, little white chick. She was just like, oh my God, what did he do to this pie? And she like, eat my bleepity bleep. Why are we doing this?